Hi guys, my name is James Greenie. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I wanted to hop on and, as the title will tell you, speak on my journey with the Thoth, my reflections, my findings, experiences, etc., all that may entail. I also have a little bit of an exciting part to this, and then we'll get more into that towards the end, but I figure we'll start with my path, as this is something that I put in my video about decks I wanted to work with in 2020, a big undertaking I wanted to have in my personal and professional practice, and I've spoken on that a few times throughout, but I haven't dedicated a solid video to just speaking about that in its entirety. So here it is. I've also been a little bit inspired by Anna at Astro Lady Tarot's recent video where she spoke on her journey and experiences with the Thoth and her reflections, and I really enjoyed that one a lot and it got me thinking, so I'll link that below. Same for Mary Grace Farron and her channel, or that video will be linked below as well. Both of them are excellent readers, content creators, and I really enjoyed watching their thoughts on their unique experiences with the Thoth. So I highly recommend checking them out and those videos specifically. And so now I'm going to get into my own experiences and findings with Thoth. So I'll take you guys through, I guess we'll make it a little bit like a story time from beginning to end, so it's chronological and it makes it easier for me to speak about it all. So I got my first Thoth deck probably about a year ago, maybe more, and I got the smaller version, this one, with this, I just had this card on the top because that was my card of the day for a bit, but the little version. And so I got this thinking that at some point I might want to work with Thoth, and when I got this, I got the Book of Thoth, and it promptly went on my shelf for quite some time, and that is no surprise to me, given that at that time I was still really engrossed in my Rider-Waite Smith studies and investigating a lot of decks of that nature, and I wasn't feeling that inclined even when I bought it. I kind of bought it so that I would have it for later, and so there it sat for quite some time. And then as we got later into 2019, when Natalia at Ouroboros hopped on YouTube and made her videos, her wonderful videos, I miss her, so if she's watching this by any chance, I miss you, but her wonderful videos, and she uses the Thoth, and she is the reason that I think a lot of us got interested in Thoth, and so that sparked something in me. And so I realized that I actually didn't like the smaller size as much for learning, so something about this was not as conducive and appealing to me when I was considering reading the Book of Thoth. And so then I set about getting the larger size, which I have now, and I actually don't use this one as much in readings just because of the space that it takes up, but I thought it feels a lot better for learning purposes to be able to look at the imagery and hold that big deck, just because you can see things a lot better. So yes, I'm sure you guys have all seen those cards. Anyway, that's where it all began. I fully read the Book of Thoth and I was hooked, and then I set about reading more books. And so yes, the Book of Thoth. I'm actually rereading it now, so this is my second go around, and since then I've read the Book M, Liber Mundi, and Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot by Lon Milo Duquette, the new edition. Oh, and this is by, I don't know if I said this, M.M. Moline. You might have seen it when I held it up. I might have said it. I don't know. So really enjoyed both of these. This one I've mentioned that I use for reference quite a bit and still do. This one, I think I had a harsher critique of this one right out the gate, and it didn't necessarily warrant the critical nature in which I displayed it. While I do have reservations and critiques about this book, I think it's really great. I still would not, for myself personally, if you came to me and asked me, would not recommend this to be a first Thoth book, but I would recommend it to be one that you do read at some point. And I think, like I've said in a recent previous video, that the Book of Thoth is more of a series of essays. It's very meditative. It's like a meandering type of journey through Aleister Crowley's head in regards to the book, in regards to the Thoth Tarot, whereas this offers a lot of structure. It's like a container for this fluid. And so I think that there's a lot to be gained from reading this. You learn a lot about the inner workings of the Golden Dawn, a little bit on the various subject matter that's contained within. And so I think that this is really valuable, but I don't think that it's still not the one that I would recommend reading first. I still think that reading this first is helpful. I don't know, the ordering of it for me was really important, and I don't think I would have gained as much if I'd read it with this first and then the second. But that's just my thoughts. And then I still think that this is the best reference book that I've come across. And of course, this is a book specifically made to accompany the Tabula Mundi Tarot, but it works for the Thoth as well, because the Tabula Mundi Tarot remains pretty true to the actual original Thoth, and it references it very heavily. So I've read those three. And then another one, and I won't even call this a favorite. I do intend to maybe at some point get through it in its entirety, but what is this? The Crowley Tarot, the Handbook to the Cards by Akron and Hajo Banzaf. It's published by US Games, who publishes modern Thoth renditions now, pretty much. And this one's really heavily reference style, so you'll get a card, it breaks down the symbolism, you get any minutia, everything broken down for you within these. And while I am not averse to reading more reference style books, as you'll see, this one's quite reference style, and a lot of it is just reading pages, defining, and going into the cards, which I know is not everybody's cup of tea as far as reading goes, so I'm not really, this doesn't turn me off reading books like this from front to back, but I've read books like this already. Those books all kind of say and do those things, so the way I'm thinking I'm going to proceed with this one is maybe potentially in my daily draws or daily card draw, using this and reading maybe the page on the given card in that time, because I haven't read this book fully, and then using that exercise as a way of getting through this book in its entirety. I might just buckle down and read the whole thing like front to back as I have the others, but as it stands, I'm not feeling so inclined, and this one just, yeah, the others kind of fulfill what this one is, so there's that. That breaks down, I guess, the books that I've read. As far as like the deeper meanings and how I feel about the Thoth, I think I like it a lot more than the Rider-Waite Smith. I know that that's a really bold statement. Mary Grace hit it on the head exactly for like how I felt about the Thoth deck, in saying that if she had started with, say, the Thoth, she would have had a lot easier time, a less steep learning curve. She would have gotten into it a lot more quickly, and I tend to agree with that. I think that the more systematic approach to the way that this is handled, it's very well structured. There is a structure and an order to it, although there is to Rider-Waite Smith. This one feels a lot more easy to kind of get down. Like she had mentioned, she has some background in astrology. She had background in astrology coming into tarot, so that was like before tarot. She already had astrology, so like that would have been a lot easier for her. I would say for me, astrology came a bit after tarot, so it wouldn't have been something for me to latch on to right away, but I still think that having those things very blatant and a part of the meaning are really helpful. I would say, for example, I think I just shook the camera, sorry. In Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, so in this book, he breaks down this idea, and I tend to agree with it, that each card is like a formula of various parts. So we have the number which signify, well, at least for the minors, we have the minors 2 through 10 to be specific, or ace through 10. We have these numbers which correspond to a Sephiroth or Sephira on the Tree of Life, and so you understand, for example, we have 9. 9, so we have Yesod, which corresponds to the moon. It's the second to last as far as going down on the Tree of Life, so yeah, it corresponds to the moon. And then we get, well, we have the keyword gain. The gain is really the culmination of the formula. And so then we have Virgo's second decan, which is ruled by Venus. So we get the combination of 9, which is Yesod, which corresponds to the moon, in conjunction with Virgo in Venus, what does that create, that sort of tree of life, and then it's of course the earth emanation, and so we get gain, and there's that really formulaic approach to it, so it is very analytical. It is something that you can kind of break down into this very formulaic raw data style of learning and knowing, which I think right out the gate is a lot easier, at least for me, to wrap my mind around than a pictorial, free-flowing image. I think, of course, I like to get to the point with all cards, and the whole point of me reading with them is to eventually glean my own meanings, have experiential knowledge, intuitive knowledge that comes with the reading, but something to start with, something that feels really solid and steady as a foundation, where I know that that's where its meaning is derived from, and I can use that. It's a fail-safe sort of method to use a deck for divination. To me, that feels really comfortable and safe, and whereas I don't feel that kind of safety in the sort of data-driven analytical approach with Rider-Waite Smith, and I know that that's of course very subjective. Of course, some people are going to not agree with that, and I know that there are of course correspondences in RWS, but I think that in Rider-Waite Smith the emphasis is on the picture, it's on the illustration, it's on the feeling. And of course we have the numbers, we have the zodiac and the astrological and all of that, those correspondences, they exist in Rider-Waite Smith, but they're not emphasized to the same degree that they are in Thoth. And so, yeah, I think that that's really where that's why I start to feel this way. And then, of course, it's Pip style in that the minors are less illustrated than, say, the courts and the majors, but I tend to not even view it as a Pip. I personally find Pips and more Marseille style decks to be a bit boring. That's my personal opinion. I just have trouble getting into sort of the monotony of just having the exact amount, and I know that there's that formation to how they work and the numerology. I get that, and for some people that's their cup of tea. It's not mine. So I really don't view this as much of a Pip deck, or if I do, I think that it's a highly illustrated Pip deck in that each of the minors in a given suit and all of the suits are just so different to the point where it doesn't feel like I'm just looking at 4 discs when I'm looking at the 4 of discs. So yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a great use of color and imagery and the way that things are structured, and they're all so intentional, and there's so much behind every small aspect, and I love knowing all of that and reading and figuring it out and connecting it in my readings when I can. And so for me, this has been a fast favorite, and one that as I've said in many previous videos recently, that I've been using for clients instead of the Rider-Waite Smith, and I've been enjoying that a lot more and finding that my readings are more substantial, that there's more to offer when I'm using this deck, and so I do tend to use it in a lot of readings for others and myself, and it just feels like this feeling of home that I wish I had when I started tarot with the Rider-Waite Smith, how I almost wish that it felt like this essential extension of myself that I couldn't really explain and want and felt so compelled to use. I wish I had that with the Rider-Waite Smith. I didn't, and that's why in the beginning it took me so many months and really even years to buckle down and fully invest myself in the learning of the Rider-Waite Smith, whereas with this one, the second I really started using it, it was really fast and I just couldn't put it down, and that continues to be the case, and I haven't really had that with any other deck or system. And so that's how I feel about that. And for all of those, I know it has like the connotation of being intimidating. I really don't think that anybody should feel intimidated by that or allow that to be a key factor in stopping them from studying the deck. There's reservations about Crowley, I get that. Like, I think, who said it? Anna at Astro Lady Tarot kind of broached it in a wonderful way, and I actually recommend you referencing that and watching her video for more on this. But yeah, Crowley's not everybody's cup of tea, and I tend to think that a lot of his writings are I don't want to go into that. I don't want to pose those sorts of arguments, and I don't think I will communicate myself effectively when I start to go down that road, and I'd rather not try to. So, but I do recommend this book. I think that there's nothing that's so scary or intimidating. There's nothing in here that's horrible and dark, and I don't find the deck itself to be this dark place. I think it's actually quite objective. I think that, to me, the Rider-Waite Smith feels a lot more deep and meaningful, and as though it's evoking feeling, and that's kind of an inextricable factor to that style and system of reading. To me, this feels, like I said, in the way that I've learned it or feel comfortable having started to learn it, that raw data aspect where you're kind of constructing, it's formulaic. So to me, this feels like you are getting very, very succinct, raw responses. So none of it feels to me to be very dark, and I think that a lot of the style in which this was intended is very interesting and more applicable to society as it stands now. For example, with the Lust card, this is a really interesting one. I think cards like Lust and the way it's depicted are really important for understanding this deck, in just that there's so much more to this. It's not really about this. Of course, if you dig into Crowley and his ceremonial magic and Thelema, and you're going to come across things like sex magic and all of his practices, and there's that. But a lot of this card doesn't really have to do with that, although it's called Lust. I don't see it as that. I see it more as this daring expression, this daring to be oneself, and that there is strength in sort of the ecstasy that comes with being uninhibited. So there's just something more to it. There's nuance, and I think that this kind of sort of strength is more applicable to society as it stands now than maybe more traditional strength depictions in cards. Same for where is it? The Aeon is another really great example of where the Thoth diverges in a way that I find really appealing. So we have the Aeon, which would be, oh my god, I can't even remember the Rider-Waite Smith. Wow. Judgment card, wow. So we have the Aeon, and I found it really interesting to kind of go through the various eons or aeons preceding, and through Isis and Osiris, and then coming into the new aeon depicted here, and those sort of periods, thousands of years of human existence and consciousness and being, and how that transition is currently unveiling in the works, so to speak, and that this is really a depiction of that and what that entails. And so for me, it's added so much nuance and layer, and to me it feels a lot more palatable and applicable in many readings than, say, the traditional pictorial image of an angel bringing dead bodies back to life, or calling them, or signifying almost that last judgment sort of depiction. So to me, this makes a lot more sense. It's more fitting. It's more metaphorical and rich in terms of language and meaning. And so there's just things like that. And then, of course, when you dig into like the color palettes and what they correspond to, that's its own ball game, and I'm not so well versed on that. But I think that even just looking at cards and really digging into what the colors evoke for you and what kind of images created through the colors, you're going to be almost unconsciously gleaning what those colors connect to. And so that's really fun and important. I'm trying to find other cards that I think are really just hitting the nail on the head and so vital for this deck. We also have, if I can find it, all right, I give up. But I really just enjoy some of the depictions and the way that they're described, and the level, and not level, but amount of depth that there is. And I think that that's something that's overwhelming but exciting for me, and I think it can be for others as well. And I think that it doesn't really necessarily mean that one is more complex or deeper than the other in terms of Rider-Waite Smith versus Thoth, but I do think that the style and the way and the meaning and those specific sort of depictions and way that messages are related through one are more appealing to some people than others. And so that definitely can play into an experience. So yeah, I guess the Thoth to me just feels... Sorry, my dog is barking at the mailman, I believe, or whining at the mailman. So yeah, the Thoth to me just feels a bit more... I guess it feels more alive. The characters feel more lively. The colors are more vibrant. The scenes, although there's no people in them, there's something about them that feels more evocative, I suppose. The way that, say, shape and color and lines are used to create emotions and feelings. And then, of course, we have the correspondences, which to me, even if you aren't aware of, say, the astrological, Kabbalistic sorts of correspondences, there's something about these cards that really communicate what the meaning is. And of course there's the keyword, which for anybody who's just learning can be kind of helpful. I also think that the keywords can be a bit deceiving and limiting. I'm not somebody who's averse at all to keywords. Of course I use this deck a lot. I love this deck. It's probably the deck I'm using the most, so I'm not averse to keywords, but I do think that there's something to them that can be limiting. For example, sorrow for the Three of Swords. And yes, I think that there's an element of sorrow. I think that all of the keywords have some merit and meaning in a more literal sense, but I also think that that's really just scratching the surface or the tip of the iceberg where this card is concerned. I think that actually, for me, it often tends to take on a meaning of truth or revealing. It has something more to do with shattering an optimistic lens, or adulting or growing up, becoming aware of certain things, harder truths, leveling up in a way, so to speak, that's sad. It's sad because it's not fun to have our wonderful ideas broken down or taken from us. And so there's something to this card that has to do with maturity and growth and awakening of the mind in a way. So the sorrow to me is really the feeling that I connect with, is a key emotion that I connect with what I think the meaning of this card is. Do I think that this card normally signifies sorrow? Not necessarily. Do I think that that's a feeling that might accompany what I find this card to mean? Oftentimes, yes. So there's that. Again, another great one is worry with the Five of Discs. And I love how Mary Grace used this card and almost said that for her, Thoth feels as though it's asking her a question as opposed to answering a question. So, and she used this card for that, so that just made me think of that. But so we see worry, and for me, I think that worry is a feeling that accompanies with what the card means. It's the emotion that one might feel when in the presence of what this card is signifying. Do I think that this card is signifying worry itself as its meaning and what it's trying to communicate? No. I think that there's something here to the, of course, material plane that more manifested self. This would be more of those mundane tasks, aspects, resources that are in flux and cause us to have anxieties about, say, things like survival and our basic needs, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and fulfilling that bottom tier. And there is an element of worry there, and it kind of keeps us in our base instincts when we can't transcend or fulfill those needs to get to the higher realms of, say, the self, the spirit, friendships, emotions. So I think that a lot of that plays into, that maybe sounded a little bit all over the place. But of course, there's worry accompanying all of those sorts of things, and that's where we get worry. And so I think that that can be deceiving, say, to somebody just embarking on a journey with Thoth and thinking that the key words are the entirety of the card. And of course, if you take the time to study and learn and attribute your own meanings, you will grow past that. But I think for those who aren't as inclined to maybe think that there's push more, I guess, or to find those experiences. For example, in Rider-Waite Smith, because you are left without keywords, you're pushed to learn about the cards. There isn't an option. You can see what's going on in the scene and use that to draw meaning, but because there isn't something so definitive, I feel like a lot of people are pushed to look to books and to learn meanings and history and nuance within the cards as told by those who have studied the cards. Whereas if a beginner were to pick up the Thoth deck, I think that the idea of the keywords is really appealing for, yes, for beginners, but I would really hope that it's not something that allows anybody who's just picking this up to become complacent. I think keywords can really engender feelings like that. It's easy to look at them and see them as the entirety of an image. And so, of course, this is speaking for those who would maybe be new to the tarot. And I think in that way, that's why I still am glad that I started with Rider-Waite Smith. It's nice, and I think that if I'd started with this, yes, I would have been inclined to learn and would have eventually, but I do think I would have gone through maybe a period of maybe like a few months or so where I was just playing with the cards and really enjoying and basing what I was finding in my readings from the keywords. And that's such a surface level way of going about it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that if I were a beginner and I were to have picked up this deck and saw all the nice keywords laid out before me, that I might have been inclined to just leave it at that, at least for some amount of time. Whereas with Rider-Waite Smith, I didn't have that, and so the scenes intrigued me, and so that's why I picked up books and decided to learn more. And then once you get going, you know that there's a lot and you continue. But I think with, say this, if I had been new to tarot, that would have been the case. Likewise, of course, I would have probably gone for the Book of Thoth. And if somebody's entirely new to tarot, the idea of tarot and cartomancy, and the Book of Thoth is the first one they're picking up, while I don't find it to be a difficult or intimidating book, I do think it can be extremely confusing for somebody who hasn't at all read another tarot book before, because it's not really explaining much about the structure. It's a meditative series of essays from somebody who is speaking almost in tongues based on these really highbrow hidden society belief systems and esoteric correspondences. There's just a lot to it, and you can figure it out as you go along. But I think for somebody that's never read any books on tarot or is completely new to tarot, picking that book up would be, it might turn them off from it. It might sway them to kind of leave it be and think that there's nothing for them there, that it's too much for them, that they aren't ready for it, something like that. And I don't think that's the case, but I do think that, for example, if I had picked up the Book of Thoth as my first tarot book ever, I would have been a little bit at a loss. And so while I do love to say and have said that I don't think that it's an intimidating book, it's not if you've read other tarot books and you're familiar with, say, what tarot is as like a structure, or somebody who has read tarot at least a little bit for yourself. But if you are completely new to this, it's not going to be a walk in the park, and it might be more of a deterrent to you than a welcoming gateway to a world of wonders. So keep that in mind. I think that that's just my 2 cents on that, and I wanted to make that bit clear, I think, just because there is still something to the Thoth that's not as inviting, and that's why I think that Rider-Waite Smith is nicer to start with, and I am glad that that's where I did start. So even though I may sound like I'm contradicting myself in saying that I would have had an easier time starting with Thoth in the beginning, I think that the feelings that this deck gives me, that I wish that I had in the beginning, yes, do I wish I had that in the beginning, and I wish I had these images, and I wish I had all of that, but I don't wish that I had, say, certain aspects of this deck that make it potentially difficult to a beginner, and I think that those are things to be wary or cautious of in the deck. So I hope that makes sense. I don't see those as contradictions. I see them as caveats or nuances to the sort of pros and cons of it being a beginner versus a non-beginner deck, and the aspects of it that make it a little bit more difficult and make it more inviting. So yeah, I hope that made it clear. I really hope I haven't just been rambling on in and not saying much. But that's a bit on, I guess, my journey with the Thoth, my thoughts on it, and where I'm currently at. And then I also have the sort of, I guess, the fun little thing I wanted to add, and partially what inspired me to make this video. I was able to get my hand on a vintage copy, a Greenie, if you will, and it was really funny that the day that I was watching Anna at Astro Lady's reflections on the Thoth Tarot, and she was speaking on her Greenie, and I remember I commented and I talked to her a bit about that and just her video in general, and she made a remark about how much she was advised to pay for a Greenie, or like the kind of like limit, and you shouldn't pay more than this is what she was advised. And so she just kind of passed that along, and I actually found that to be really valuable because a lot of them are quite overpriced, and that's why I hadn't purchased one up until that point. And it was on that exact day, right after that dialogue where she gave me that advice, that I stumbled upon the Greenie that I now have that was at the price point that she mentioned, and that was the first time that I'd seen a Greenie online at that price point. And so here it is. I know that there are multiple like editions and versions of older copies or vintage copies of the Thoth Tarot, so this is what mine looks like. It came in the box. And part of the, like, I don't know, I think I got really lucky with this. I actually found it on Amazon, which is not where I would normally recommend finding older vintage or out of print decks because they tend to be more expensive there. But I went out on a limb and just checked in, and I had mostly been scanning eBay with the occasional Etsy search and those sorts of things. And then I came across this, and as you may know, it's not really easy to show images on Amazon, at least for smaller sellers who are just selling one-off items. It's not easy to really post those images so much. So all I saw was this, and I reached out to the seller and asked if I could see some more pictures before deciding. I kind of wanted to make sure that it was one in good condition, although it said like new, and that it was indeed a Greenie, because I do know there are vintage copies that don't have that greenish hue to them at all. And so if I had received that, it would have felt kind of like a letdown. But so I got a quick response from the seller, and it was actually really surprising, and they said that it was still wrapped in plastic and that it would be difficult for them to send pictures because it wasn't opened. And that was really exciting, and so I just asked them to send the pictures that they could, given the situation that it was still brand new. And so it is indeed still wrapped in plastic, and I have not opened it yet. And as you will see, it is green compared to, say, so you can really see the color tone difference. So yes, I got really excited. I was like, what are the odds that there's one of these even in circulation that exists that isn't opened and is going for this price? Oh, and it still has the guidebook, and the guidebook's in like perfect, little white book's in like perfect condition. And so I jumped on it really quick, and it's a version that, and I know I've seen other Greenies that are different. So this is one that has actually the different languages. It has the titles in different languages across the top and a little bit on the side. So I believe we have Spanish, French, and I want to say maybe it's German, maybe I'm not sure. Somebody who speaks more languages than I do or is familiar with more languages, maybe you could tell me, but it has the few languages up here, and then it'll have the title down there. But so yeah, I've seen other versions where it doesn't have that. It doesn't really bother me that it has the multiple titles going around. But it's the version that doesn't have the borders on the back, which is really lovely. And I was just thinking maybe I wanted kind of a nice occasion to open this, which is why I didn't open it right away. And so I figured in filming this video that we could open it together, do a little unboxing. I don't know if that's of interest to anybody, so if it's not, feel free to sign off if you just wanted to hear me ramble. If you were just here for the unboxing, then that's great too, and you get to see that. But I will take us over to my tarot table, and I guess we will unbox it together, and that might be a fun fun experience for someone out there. I don't know. Yeah, so I'll take us over there, and yeah. Hi everyone, we're at my tarot table, so I will get into the unboxing. Well, technically it's out of the box, but you know what I mean, out of the plastic wrap, so yes. This feels like so, I don't know how to put it, not old, well yeah, kind of old I guess. It feels like it's definitely been wrapped up for some time, and it's very stiff plastic, if that makes any sense. So it's off. And so I guess we'll do a flip through for anybody who hasn't or isn't as familiar with this deck, or I guess this version of this deck. James again. So I hope you guys enjoyed that and seeing a little peek at the cards and the unboxing portion. I'm sure you guys are familiar with what the images look like, but I just thought that would be a fun experience. So if you liked that, feel free to physically like, and subscribe. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.